The first thing my sister said wasn't hello, it was, "We don't feed extras." The words, sharp and expertly aimed, cut through the warm, sophisticated hum of the restaurant. They were a shard of ice in the ambient glow, landing with a quiet, devastating precision. She slid a plain, thick-rimmed water glass across the polished mahogany table, the kind they use for staff in the back. It stopped just inches from my son's hand, a clear, sweating circle of condemnation on the gleaming wood I had chosen myself for its deep, rich grain. The contrast was stark, almost theatrical, against the delicate, long-stemmed crystal goblets that waited, like expectant starlets, for her, my mother, and her own 2 daughters. My son Leo, just 14, but carrying a heart far too gentle for this world, flinched. It wasn't a large movement, just a slight, involuntary tightening of his shoulders beneath the new navy blazer I'd insisted on buying him for this very evening. "I want you to feel as important as anyone there," I'd told him, "because you are." He had been so excited, his eyes bright with the prospect of a fancy dinner out. Now that light was gone, extinguished. He just stared at the glass, his dark hair falling across his forehead, a silken curtain hiding the hurt in his eyes. My mother, Eleanor, presiding at the head of the table like a benevolent queen surveying her court, didn't miss a beat. She adjusted her reading glasses, the delicate gold chain glinting under the soft, bespoke pendant lights of Arya. "You should know your place, dear," she added, her voice a smooth, creamy balm that did nothing to soothe the sting. It was a practiced tone, one that feigned wisdom while delivering a verdict. And while her eyes flickered toward Leo, the words weren't for him. They were a poisoned dart meant for me. They always were. In that single, crystallized moment, the world seemed to go silent. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking of silverware on porcelain, the sophisticated murmur of conversations, the distant, rhythmic sizzle from the open kitchen I had designed to be the heart of the room, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. All I could hear was the frantic, trapped bird beating of my own heart against my ribs, and the almost imperceptible sound of my son swallowing hard beside me. The lump in his throat felt lodged in mine, a shared stone of humiliation. I didn't fight, I didn't cry, I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. A lifetime of these tiny, soul-crushing moments had been my training ground. They fed on emotional displays, growing stronger on the tears and anger of others. So I did what I had learned to do. I constructed a fortress of ice around my heart, pulled my lips into a small, tight smile that was an act of war, not warmth, looked directly into my sister Caroline's expectant eyes, and uttered a single, chillingly calm word. Noted. Caroline's perfectly painted red mouth thinned into a disapproving line. She had been braced for a scene, had likely been anticipating it all day. My refusal to engage, to give her the drama she craved, was a form of defiance she never understood. With a flick of her wrist, a gesture meant to dismiss me and the entire unpleasantness, she waved a hand glittering with rings. "Well, now that that's settled," she announced with a brittle brightness, "let's get on with the celebration." Her daughters, Olivia and Sophia, 16-year-old mirror images of their mother's casual disdain, didn't even look up from their phones. They were too engrossed in their own digital worlds to notice the flesh and blood one being dismantled at their table. They were here to be celebrated for their college acceptances, a triumph paved with expensive tutors and an admissions consultant, a fee I had a sickening suspicion had been indirectly funded by me. It had been Caroline's choice, of course. "It's the only place in the city worth being seen in, Bianca," she declared over the phone. The chef is an absolute genius. You have to book months in advance. A bitter laugh threatened to escape my lips. I could have told her that I had personally scouted that genius from a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Lyon. I could have told her I'd spent countless nights poring over every single detail of this room, from the exact shade of ocean gray leather on the booths to the weight of the silver in her hand. I could have told her that every invoice, every payroll check, every single succulent lobster waiting in the kitchen tank bore the imprint of my company's name, but I didn't. Tonight, I was playing a role I knew by heart. Bianca, the quiet younger sister, the responsible one, the emergency contact, the ATM, and beside me sat my son, Leo, the extra. I reached under the table, my hand finding his knee, and gave it a firm, reassuring squeeze. He didn't look at me, but I felt a small measure of the rigid tension leave his body. He trusted me, and that trust was the only thing in the world that mattered. I would not fail it. Not tonight. The stage was set, the actors were in place, but the script was about to be flipped. Before I tell you what happened when the chef arrived, I want to thank you for being here. Tell me what city you're watching from in the comments below. A young woman with a neat blonde bun and a nervous but genuine smile approached our table. Her small silver name tag read Sarah. My mind instantly pulled up her file. Sarah Jenkins, university student, art history major. I'd hired her myself 3 months ago, impressed by her poise and her quiet determination to graduate without debt. She had no idea who I was, of course. To her, in my simple silk blouse and with my hair down, I was just another part of the toxic tableau she had the misfortune of serving tonight. "Good evening," Sarah began, her pen poised over her notepad. "May I get you started with some beverages this evening?" Caroline, who treated waitstaff as a necessary but inconvenient piece of furniture, answered before anyone else could even open their mouths. "We'll have a bottle of the Silver Oak Chardonnay," she announced, pointing a manicured finger at the wine list, the 2019. It was a superb wine, and also one with a handsome profit margin. A small, vindictive part of my brain took comfort in that. "An excellent choice," Sarah said, making a note. "And for the rest of the table?" Her professional gaze moved around, finally resting on Leo. Leo, my sweet boy, ever hopeful, decided to try again. He sat up a little straighter, his voice soft but clear. "May I please have a sparkling water with a slice of lime?" It was such a small request, a simple desire to feel a part of the celebration. Before Sarah could even form the words, "Of course," Caroline's voice sliced through the air. "He'll have tap water." The words were flat, non-negotiable. She didn't bother to look at Leo. Her gaze was fixed on me, a clear, unmistakable challenge, in a regular glass. Leo's face fell. The tiny spark of hope I had seen in his eyes was instantly extinguished, leaving behind a familiar, dull resignation. "Oh," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "I just thought—" "It's perfectly fine, Leo," Caroline said, that dismissive hand-wave making another appearance. "The sparkling water is for the celebratory toast, for the guests of honor." She beamed at her daughters, who offered weak, uncomfortable smiles in return. They knew it was cruel, but they also knew the price of defying their mother. Sarah hesitated, her training battling with her basic human decency. Her smile faltered, and her eyes flickered from Caroline's imperious face to mine. She was looking for an adult in the room, a signal to override the blatant unkindness. I gave her the slightest of nods, a microscopic movement. It wasn't a nod of surrender. It was a silent command. "Follow her lead for now. I will handle this." A flicker of relief crossed her face as she scribbled tap water on her pad, her movements now a little stiff. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. My mother, ever the orchestrator of passive aggression, chose that moment to fill it. "It truly is wonderful that we can all be together," she said, carefully unfolding her linen napkin. "It's a shame some of us don't get to experience this sort of refinement more often." The jab was clearly aimed at my life as a widowed, single mother, a status she viewed as a tragic step down from Caroline's life of leisure, bankrolled by her husband's questionable business ventures. When Sarah returned to take our food order, Leo, ever the optimist, tried one last time. He had been studying the menu with intense concentration, as if it held a secret key to acceptance. "The shrimp scampi looks really good," he said, pointing to the description. "Could I please have that?" Caroline didn't even grace him with a look. Her eyes were still scanning the entrees. "That's a bit rich for tonight, Leo." My voice, when I finally spoke, was dangerously quiet. "Rich in what way, Caroline?" She finally looked up, a condescending smirk playing on her lips. It was the look she reserved for people she considered simple-minded. "Bianca, please, this entire evening is about the twins' extraordinary achievements. We don't need to complicate things with extravagant orders from everyone. It sends the wrong message." "He's a growing boy, and he's hungry," I said, my words clipped and precise. "Then he can eat a proper meal when he gets home," she retorted, snapping her menu shut with a sharp, final sound. It was a gavel striking down his last hope. And then, to twist the knife, she repeated the phrase that had started it all, her voice dripping with a venom she no longer bothered to conceal. "We don't feed extras." This time, the words landed like a physical blow. The quiet chatter from the surrounding tables faltered. People were starting to notice. Leo stared down at the tablecloth, his jaw clenched, blinking far too rapidly. I saw the telltale shimmer of unshed tears in his eyes, and something deep inside me, a dormant volcano of 2 decades of swallowed rage, began to rumble. The ground was starting to shake. As Caroline launched into an insufferable monologue about the difficulty of choosing between 2 Ivy League schools, the opulent dining room of Aria dissolved around me. The rich aroma of roasted garlic and rosemary was replaced by the sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic and fading flowers. The soft strains of the jazz trio faded, and in their place I heard the steady, relentless beep of a heart monitor, a metronome counting down the final moments of the most important man in my life. I was 22 again, perched on the edge of an uncomfortable vinyl chair, my hand clutching my father's. His own hand, once so strong and calloused from a life of building things, felt fragile, a bundle of bones wrapped in paper-thin skin. Cancer had whittled him down to a mere whisper of the vibrant, booming man who had taught me how to read blueprints and change a flat tire. But it hadn't touched the fierce intelligence in his eyes. Not yet. Robert Hale was a man of substance. He had built a successful construction company from the ground up, with nothing but a second-hand pickup truck and an unshakable work ethic. He saw the world in clean, simple lines. You work hard, you honor your word, and you protect your own. He'd always seen me. While my mother, Eleanor, praised Caroline for her beauty and her social charm, my father praised me for my straight A's in physics, for my meticulous architectural models, for the logical, ordered way my mind worked. "She floats," he used to say of Caroline with a wry smile. "You build. You've got my foundation, Bianca." He saw the steel in my spine that everyone else mistook for obstinance. On that final, hazy afternoon, the air in the hospital room was thick with unspoken grief. His grip on my hand tightened with surprising strength. "Bianca," he whispered, his voice a dry, rasping echo of its former power. "You're the strong one. You always were." Hot tears streamed down my face, but I refused to make a sound, not wanting to waste a single second of the time we had left. Your mother, she's got a soft heart. And your sister? He let out a long, weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of frustration. She was born with her hand out. Someone in this family has to be the anchor. He pulled me a fraction closer, his eyes locking onto mine. Promise me you'll look after them. The business, I'm selling it. The money from the sale should be enough. Don't let them burn through it. Promise me. I promise, Dad, I choked out, the words tearing at my throat. But he wasn't finished. No, he insisted, his gaze sharpening with a final surge of energy. Promise me something else. You look after yourself. You are my real legacy, Bianca. Not the company, not the money. Your mind, your spirit. Don't you ever let them extinguish your light just to keep themselves warm. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Looking after them is not the same as letting them use you up. I nodded, unable to speak, the depth of his words settling into my bones. For years, I had selectively remembered that conversation. I had clung to the first part, look after them, and forged it into a shield of duty, a justification for my own self-neglect. I became the anchor, all right. An anchor so heavy it was pulling me down into the suffocating depths. After the funeral, the inheritance was placed into a family trust. My mother, the executor, proved to be a poor steward, easily swayed by Caroline's constant stream of emergencies. The trust bled out, and I started working, channeling my grief into an unstoppable drive. I honored my father, the builder, by becoming one myself, first in architecture, then in real estate, and finally with my own hospitality group. But sitting here now in this magnificent room born from my own vision, watching my son be relegated to the status of an outcast, I finally understood the second part of his promise. My light wasn't just my career or my bank account. It was my self-respect. It was my son's dignity. And my family wasn't just huddling by my fire for warmth. They were pouring gasoline on it, ready to dance in the flames of my destruction. The steady beep of the heart monitor faded from my memory, and I was back at the table. The rumble inside me was no longer a warning. It was an eruption. The ghost of my father's warning lingered, and my mind, now a rogue archivist, pulled another memory from its dusty files. This one was sharper, the wound still tender. It was 5 years ago, on a bleak, rain-lashed Tuesday in November. I was in my office, trying to solve a complex zoning issue for my first hotel project, a venture I had poured every ounce of my savings and sanity into. My phone buzzed, a frantic, insistent vibration. It was Caroline, her voice a torrent of hysterical sobs. "It's all over, Bianca. Everything is ruined." It was the familiar overture to a crisis. Her husband, Mark, a man whose charm was only exceeded by his stunning lack of business acumen, had done it again. Her latest vanity project, a high-end fashion boutique launched with a second mortgage on their house, was hemorrhaging money. The creditors were circling. The bank was making noises about foreclosure. "I need your help," she wailed, the words punctuated by theatrical gasps. "It's just a loan, 100,000, that's all. I'll pay you back. I swear on the girls' lives, every single penny." A cold, weary part of me knew this was a lie. She never paid anyone back. But then came the well-honed tools of her trade, manipulation and guilt. Think of Olivia and Sophia. Do you want your precious nieces to be thrown out on the street? What would Dad think if he could see you, with all your success, turning your back on his family? And then, right on cue, my mother was on the line, the velvet glove to Caroline's iron fist. Bianca, dear, it's only money. It comes and goes. Family is forever. We have to help them. It's what good families do. Against the screaming protests of my rational mind, against the hard-won lessons of my past, I caved. I did it. I called my broker and liquidated a significant portion of a stock portfolio I had been carefully, painstakingly building for Leo's college fund. I justified it to myself as a loan. I even took the pathetic step of drafting a formal promissory note, which Caroline signed without reading, a flimsy legal shield against the emotional onslaught. I wired the money. The hysterical crying ceased as if a switch had been flipped. A week later, my social media feed presented me with the bitter truth. A photo of Caroline and Mark, grinning, clinking champagne glasses in a first-class airport lounge. The caption read, "A much-needed escape to Paris. Sometimes you just have to treat yourself. #YOLO. The boutique was declared bankrupt a month later. I never saw a cent of the money. When I dared to bring it up 6 months later, my voice shaking with timid anger, Caroline had laughed it off. "Oh, Bianca, don't be so terribly dramatic. You know I'm no good with all that boring legal stuff. Consider it a gift. Family helps family, right?" My mother had provided the chorus. "She was under so much stress, dear. You can't possibly hold her to that. Besides, you're doing so well for yourself. It's a blessing to be in a position to share." Share. That was the word they used. It felt less like sharing and more like being systematically plundered. They saw my success not as the result of 80-hour work weeks, sleepless nights, and the constant, crushing stress of running a business as a single mother. They saw it as a magical, regenerating resource, a family trust fund with my name on it, to which they had unlimited access. I stared across the table at my sister, now lecturing her daughters on the importance of networking. She was a black hole in a designer dress, a vortex of need and entitlement that consumed everything in its path, my money, my patience, my son's sense of worth. And for 2 decades, I had stood by and let it happen. I had paid the price of silence, and the debt had finally come due. Tonight, I was foreclosing. With a chilling new sense of purpose settling over me like a cloak, I gently placed my linen napkin on the table. "You'll have to excuse me for a moment," I said, my voice a placid sea belying the hurricane raging within. "I need to visit the powder room." Caroline waved me away, already bored with me, her attention now focused on flagging down a waiter to complain about the temperature of the wine. My mother shot me a narrow-eyed glare, a silent warning. "Don't you dare cause a scene, Bianca." I rose from the table, my movements fluid and deliberate. I turned away from the diners, my heels making soft, authoritative clicks on the polished Italian marble floor. I didn't walk towards the elegantly marked ladies' lounge near the front entrance. Instead, I headed down a quiet, wood-paneled corridor towards the back of the restaurant, a passageway that led past the humming, controlled chaos of the kitchen. At the very end of the hallway was a single, unmarked door made of the same dark mahogany as the paneling. To the casual observer, it was a utility closet, a staff-only space. I reached into my purse, my fingers bypassing my wallet and keys, closing around a slim, black keycard. I pressed it against a small, nearly invisible scanner set flush into the doorframe. A faint electronic beep, a soft click, and the heavy door swung inward on silent hinges. I slipped inside, closing it securely behind me. The transition was jarring. The sophisticated symphony of the restaurant was instantly replaced by a deep, insulated silence. I was not in a closet. I was standing in a small, meticulously organized office. A sleek, minimalist desk held a laptop and a multi-line phone system. A single, comfortable leather armchair was angled towards the front wall. And that wall, the one that faced the main dining room, was a single, immense sheet of one-way glass. This was my secret vantage point, my command center. From here, the entire restaurant was laid out before me like a living diorama. My family's table was perfectly framed, the star of a silent, tragic play. Through the glass, I watched my mother lean in to whisper something conspiratorially to Caroline, who then let out a short, sharp laugh. I saw my son, my brave, beautiful boy, staring down at his empty place setting, his shoulders hunched as if to ward off a physical blow. He was trying to make himself invisible. The sight sent a fresh torrent of cold, clarifying fury through my veins. I had this office designed into the restaurant's blueprints from day one, much to the confusion of my architects. They saw it as an owner's eccentric whim. I knew it was a necessity. I called it my observation deck. It allowed me to watch the flow of a service, to see the unvarnished truth of my business in action. Tonight, its purpose was far more personal. It was my war room. I sank into the cool leather of the armchair, the silence a balm to my frayed nerves. For a long moment, I simply watched them, my family, a tableau of casual cruelty and inherited entitlement. They looked so utterly at ease, so comfortable in this temple of gastronomy and design that I had bled for. They moved through my world as if it were their birthright, all while treating its creator like an unwelcome guest. The irony was so thick, so bitter, I could taste it on my tongue. Caroline had chosen my creation as the stage for her ultimate power play. She believed she was the director, the writer, and the star of this evening's production. She had no idea that the producer was sitting behind a one-way mirror, holding the final script, about to call for a dramatic and permanent scene change. I took a deep, steadying breath. It was time to review my lines. I swiveled the chair toward the desk, my movements now devoid of any emotional turmoil. They were precise, economical, and focused. I knew exactly what I needed. With a small antique silver key that I wore on a chain around my neck, I unlocked the top drawer of the desk. Inside, nestled between quarterly financial reports and staffing schedules, was a single, slim folder. It wasn't beige or manila. It was a stark, declarative blood red with a single word printed on the tab in my neat architectural script, family. I placed the folder on the polished surface of the desk and opened it. There were no smiling holiday photos or sentimental greeting cards inside. It was an archive of grievances, a meticulously documented history of financial and emotional exploitation. It contained the receipts. The very first page was a high-quality scan of the promissory note for the $100,000 loan, Caroline's flamboyant, looping signature at the bottom. Stapled neatly to the corner were glossy printouts of her Instagram posts from Paris, Caroline posing by the Eiffel Tower, Mark sipping espresso at a chic cafe. Behind that was a multi-page spreadsheet I had maintained with the cold precision of an auditor. Each row represented a separate transaction, a new leak in the dam of my finances. March 2018, emergency root canal for Mark, $4,200. August 2019, tuition for Olivia and Sophia's essential summer riding camp, $8,500. December 2020, down payment for Caroline's new luxury SUV, $15,000. The list went on and on, a grim chronicle of manufactured crises and subsidized lifestyles. There were printouts of emails from my mother, her language a masterclass in gentle coercion. Caroline is just beside herself with worry about the new lawyer fees for Mark's latest divorce from reality, Bianca. I know you wouldn't want to see your sister suffer. And then there were Caroline's own texts, a chaotic blend of tearful pleading and entitled demands, sometimes in the same message. I ran my finger down the final column to the grand total at the bottom. The number made me physically sick. It was enough to have funded a significant charitable grant. It was more than the initial seed money for this very restaurant. It was a monument to my own misplaced hope, my foolish, stubborn belief that one day my generosity would be met not with another demand, but with a simple, heartfelt thank you. But this folder was not just a relic of the past. It was a tool for the future. For tonight, I had known for weeks that this dinner was an ambush. Caroline never celebrated anything without an ulterior motive. Her recent, vague laments about market instability and Mark's unlucky streak were the predictable prelude to another major withdrawal from the Bank of Bianca. This time, the vault was closed. I picked up the dedicated phone line on the desk, a direct line that bypassed the restaurant's main switchboard, and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang only once before a crisp, calm voice answered. Chen? David, it's Bianca, I said, my voice low and steady. She's here. The performance has begun. There was a slight pause. I'm in position, he replied. Table 7, near the window. I must say, her portrayal of a concerned, financially prudent individual is quite compelling. She has a future in theater. A small, grim smile touched my lips. She's about to make her pitch. Are you prepared? The documents are in my briefcase. The analysis is irrefutable. Consider me your humble servant, Miss Hale, or in this case, your accountant with a flair for the dramatic. Thank you, David. I'll give you the signal. I ended the call. David Chen was the sharpest risk analyst in my entire corporation. When Caroline had casually mentioned she was bringing her new financial advisor to dinner to go over a family investment opportunity, a quick search had revealed the man didn't exist. It was a classic Caroline bluff. So I had arranged for my own expert to be present, a surprise witness, a man whose greatest passion in life was dismantling fraudulent financial narratives. I closed the red folder. Holding it was like holding a shield and a sword all in one. I stood and took one last look through the glass. They were laughing now, my mother and Caroline, sharing some private joke. They were blissfully, arrogantly unaware that the curtain was about to rise on the final act, and I was no longer a member of the audience. I was about to take center stage. I returned to the table with the calm of a seasoned actress stepping into a familiar role. The wine bottle was now more than half empty, and Caroline's cheeks were flushed, a combination of expensive Chardonnay and a sense of impending victory. The main courses had been served to everyone except Leo. A magnificent lobster platter, glistening with clarified butter, sat before each of my nieces. My mother was delicately flaking a piece of perfectly seared sea bass. Caroline herself was slicing into a medium-rare filet mignon, and in front of Leo there remained only his glass of tap water, the empty space on the tablecloth, a testament to his designated status. "There you are," Caroline trilled, her voice a shade too loud, a shade too bright. "We were just getting to the exciting part." I took my seat, my spine as straight as a steel rod, and folded my hands in my lap. My large leather handbag, containing the red folder, rested by my feet like a loyal, slumbering watchdog. "Oh?" I said, my voice a carefully modulated note of polite interest. This was it. The entire evening, from the choice of venue to the public humiliation of my son, had been a calculated preamble to this single moment. Caroline leaned forward, her entire posture shifting into one of feigned sincerity and vulnerability. She was a surprisingly good actress when money was on the line. She even managed to conjure a convincing shimmer of tears in her eyes. "Bianca, you know things have been difficult for Mark and me lately. The economy, it's just been so terribly unpredictable. We've had some rather significant setbacks." I said nothing. I simply held her gaze, my face a blank canvas upon which she could project whatever she wished. My silence was a vacuum, and her nature, like all nature, abhorred it. She rushed to fill it. "We're in real danger of losing the house," she said, her voice dropping to a dramatic, confidential whisper. "The bank has been difficult." I just can't bear the thought of the girls losing their home, their stability, especially right before they go off to college. Their whole world would be turned upside down. My mother, right on cue, reached across the table to pat Caroline's hand in a gesture of maternal comfort. Now, darling, don't you worry. Bianca will help us. She always does. That's what family is for." Her eyes met mine over Caroline's bowed head, and they were not pleading. They were commanding. "We have a plan, though," Caroline said, rallying. "A foolproof investment opportunity. It's a guaranteed return. That's why I wanted you to meet my advisor, David. He's here tonight. He can walk you through the entire portfolio." She glanced vaguely around the crowded dining room, a pantomime of searching for a man she had invented. I decided to cut through the performance. "You mean you need a loan?" I stated. It was not a question. Caroline's eyes narrowed for a fleeting second, the mask slipping to reveal the raw irritation beneath, before she corrected herself. "Well, yes, a bridge loan, really. Just a short-term thing to get us through this rough patch and onto solid ground. We need $250,000. The number fell onto the table with the obscene thud of a body dropped from a great height. It was breathtaking in its audacity. It was a declaration of her perceived power over me, and it was exactly the figure I had predicted. She read my continued silence as a sign of weakening resolve. It was time for her to press her advantage. "Don't think of it as a loan, Bianca," she urged, her voice softening into a wheedling purr. "Think of it as an investment in our family, an investment in your niece's future. You wouldn't want their access to their college fund to be jeopardized, would you?" The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost sublime. She had just denied my son a $20 plate of pasta out of principle and was now asking me for $250,000. She had branded him an extra, a non-person, while simultaneously treating me as the sole underwriter of her disastrous life choices. I took a slow, deliberate sip from my own water glass, the cool liquid doing little to quench the fire in my belly. I let the silence stretch, making it as uncomfortable as possible. I watched the confident, predatory light in her eyes begin to flicker, replaced by a growing impatience. I wasn't following the script. I wasn't rushing in with reassurances. I wasn't playing my part. My resolute silence was clearly not part of her plan. Caroline's carefully constructed facade of the desperate victim was beginning to crack under the strain of my noncompliance. Her scene partner was refusing to say her lines, and the play was grinding to a halt. The manufactured tears in her eyes dried up, replaced by the hard, cold glint of anger. She abandoned pleading and moved to her final, most trusted weapon, emotional blackmail. "Bianca, for heaven's sake, don't be like this," she said, her voice shedding its soft, wheedling tone and taking on a sharp, scolding edge. "This isn't just about money, and you know it. This is about loyalty. It's about what kind of sister, what kind of person you choose to be." I allowed one eyebrow to arch slightly. "And what kind of person is that, Caroline?" "The kind who doesn't abandon her own family in their time of need," she snapped, her voice rising in volume, causing the couple at the adjacent table to glance over with mild alarm. "The kind who remembers where she came from." Or have you built so many fancy hotels that you've forgotten the people who were there for you at the beginning? My mother, sensing the shift in tactics, seamlessly transitioned into her supporting role. "Caroline, dear, lower your voice," she soothed, before turning her disappointed, sorrowful gaze on me. "Bianca, your sister is just overwrought. She doesn't mean it like that. But she does have a point. Your father would be so deeply disappointed to see this rift between you. All he ever wanted was for his girls to be close, to support one another through thick and thin." There it was, the ace up their sleeve, the nuclear option, invoking the ghost of my father, twisting his memory, his love, his dying wishes into a cudgel designed to beat me into submission. It was their most effective tool, a tactic they had deployed with devastating success for nearly 2 decades. The mere mention of his disappointment was usually enough to flood me with guilt, to make me question my own resolve, to open my checkbook. But tonight was different. Tonight, the memory of my father didn't bring guilt. It brought a righteous, clarifying anger. I remembered his real words, the ones they had conveniently forgotten. "Don't you ever let them extinguish your light." "You're right," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "Dad would be disappointed, but I don't believe for a second he'd be disappointed in me." The air at the table crackled with sudden, high-voltage tension. This was uncharted territory. I had never spoken back. I had never questioned their narrative. Caroline's face flushed a deep, mottled red. She leaned far across the table, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Let me be perfectly clear, Bianca. If you refuse to help us, you will be the one who shatters this family. You will be the reason your nieces are forced to leave their childhood home, and I will make damn sure everyone knows it. I will call Aunt Carol. I will call Uncle Gene. I will tell every single person in our extended family what a cold, heartless, selfish person you've become. Is that really what you want? To be all alone with your precious money?" The threat was so hollow, it was almost comical. I was already alone within this family. They had made sure of that years ago. They had built a wall around me, not to protect me, but to contain me, to keep their resource from escaping. My gaze shifted to my son. He was watching the entire exchange, his eyes wide, a silent witness to his mother's public execution. He looked terrified. But beneath the fear, I saw a new light dawning in his eyes. It was hope. And that was all the permission I needed. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It felt alien and powerful. "Thank you, Caroline," I said, my voice imbued with a strange, light-hearted calm. "You've made everything perfectly clear." I turned my head slightly, my eyes finding the maitre d', who stood, ever watchful, near the kitchen entrance. It was time. I gave him the signal we had arranged that afternoon, a simple, almost imperceptible nod. The first act was over. The climax was about to begin. The maître d', a consummate professional named Gerard, whom I had personally hired for his discretion and unflappable calm, gave a single formal dip of his head in acknowledgement. He then turned and disappeared for a moment. Caroline, completely misreading the situation, saw my smile as a sign of her victory. She leaned back in her chair, a triumphant smirk replacing the anger on her face. She believed the threat had landed, that I was about to crumble as I always had. "Good," she said, lifting her wineglass in a mock toast. "I knew you'd eventually see reason. Family is what matters most." At that precise moment, the large, swinging double doors to the kitchen opened, but it wasn't a harried busboy or a waiter carrying a tray. It was Chef Antoine Dubois himself, emerging in his immaculate white jacket, his tall chef's toque a crown of culinary authority. He was a legend in the gastronomic world, a man whose rare appearances in the dining room were whispered about for weeks. He was tall, with the quiet, intense presence of a true artist, and he began walking with purpose directly toward our table. Caroline froze mid-sip, her wine glass hovering near her lips. To be visited personally by a chef of Antoine's stature was the ultimate status symbol, a public anointing of one's importance. Her back straightened instantly. A pleased, self-satisfied expression settled on her face as she prepared to be recognized, to receive the deference she so clearly believed she was owed. Chef Antoine came to a stop at the head of our table, standing beside my mother. He did not look at Caroline. His dark, intelligent eyes found mine. "Good evening, Miss Hale," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone, the French accent adding a layer of gravitas. "I trust everything is to your complete satisfaction this evening." The silence that descended upon our table was not just an absence of sound. It was a physical entity, a heavy blanket that smothered all noise. It was so profound that I could distinctly hear the fizz of a champagne flute being refilled 3 tables away. Caroline's jaw went slack, her carefully applied lipstick suddenly looking garish. My mother's hand, which had been raising her fork, remained suspended in midair, a bizarre, frozen gesture. Olivia and Sophia, for the first time all evening, looked up from their phones, their faces identical masks of wide-eyed confusion. "Bianca, what is the meaning of this?" Caroline finally stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. "How do you know the chef?" A serene calm had settled over me. I was no longer an actor in their play. I was the playwright. "Chef Antoine," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying easily to the nearby tables who were now shamelessly listening in. "My family seems to be operating under a slight misapprehension. I was hoping you might be able to clarify something for them." The chef's gaze remained fixed on me, his expression professional and unreadable, though I thought I detected a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "But of course, Miss Hale." "I am at your service." "My family is under the impression that they are the gracious hosts of this dinner," I said, allowing my eyes to sweep over my sister and mother. "But I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about who, precisely, is in charge here. Would you be so kind as to tell my sister, Caroline, who you report to at Aria?" Chef Antoine's gaze shifted from me to the utterly baffled face of my sister and then back to me. The flicker of amusement in his eyes deepened into full comprehension. He understood this was theater, and he had just been handed a starring role. He turned his head slightly, addressing Caroline directly, though his words were clearly for the benefit of the entire room. His voice was polite, formal, but carried the weight of absolute authority. "Madame," he said, "I am the executive chef of this establishment. My entire brigade, the sommeliers, the waitstaff, the management, we all report to her." He made a small, respectful gesture with his head in my direction. "I report to Miss Bianca Hale, the owner of Aria." If silence could shatter, the dining room would have been filled with the sound of 1,000 breaking windows. Caroline's face went through a rapid, horrifying series of transformations, from smugness to confusion to disbelief to a stark, gray, bloodless shock. My mother let out a small, strangled sound, like a mouse caught in a trap. "Owner?" Caroline breathed, the word a puff of empty air. That's ridiculous. It's not possible." "Oh, it's very possible," I said, my voice still light, but now underscored with the strength of reinforced concrete. "I don't just have a good reservation here, Caroline. I own here." the restaurant, the building we are sitting in, the entire hospitality group that holds the deed, Meridian Hospitality. It is mine. I paused, letting the words land with their full, devastating weight. Every single paycheck, every bottle of vintage wine, every succulent lobster that comes out of that kitchen, it all flows through an account that bears my signature. The revelation sucked all the remaining oxygen from our corner of the room. Caroline just stared, her mouth slightly agape, her carefully constructed world crumbling into dust around her. My mother looked as if she had seen a ghost, the ghost of my father, perhaps, returning to witness this final, brutal reckoning. The power dynamic at the table hadn't just been altered. It had been inverted, shattered, and remade with me at its undeniable center. But how is that possible? My mother finally whispered, her voice trembling. We never knew. Because I never told you, I replied, my voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a weary truth. It was accomplished through hard work, Mother, years of it. While some people were redecorating, I was renovating distressed properties. While some people were taking cruises, I was cruising financial reports. It's amazing what one can achieve when one isn't constantly bailing out the irresponsible choices of others. I let them absorb the sting of that statement before delivering the next, carefully planned blow. I turned my gaze across the dining room, my eyes landing on a specific table by the large picture window. Caroline, you mentioned you were so eager for me to meet your financial advisor, a Mr. David Chen. I believe I see him over there. He seems to be enjoying his solo dinner. Why don't we invite him to join us for a moment? I gave a small, deliberate wave. The man at table 7, a distinguished, impeccably dressed man in his late 40s with intelligent eyes and an air of quiet confidence, stood up and began to walk toward our table. Caroline looked from the approaching stranger to me, her face a canvas of pure confusion. "That's not David," she stammered. I don't know who that is." "Oh, I think you do," I said, my voice dangerously sweet. "Or rather, you should get to know him. He certainly knows you. David, please, allow me to make the formal introduction. This is my sister, Caroline, and my mother, Eleanor. Family, this is Mr. David Chen. He is not, as you might have guessed, Caroline's financial advisor." David reached our table and gave a slight, formal bow, every inch the consummate professional. "Good evening, ladies," he said, his voice as crisp and precise as a freshly printed bank statement. He looked directly at Caroline, his gaze analytical and unnervingly direct. "We haven't been formally introduced, Mrs. Lambert, but I feel as though I know you quite intimately, or at least your spending habits. I am the lead risk analyst for the Meridian Hospitality Group, Miss Hale's company." He placed the slim leather briefcase he was carrying on an empty chair, opened it, and pulled out a neatly bound document, placing it on the table next to Caroline's half-eaten filet mignon. It was filled with graphs, charts, and dense columns of numbers. Prior to this evening's dinner, Miss Hale tasked me with conducting a full financial review of the informal family investment proposal she anticipated you would be making, David continued, his tone clinical, the voice of a surgeon explaining a terminal diagnosis. "Based on the public records from your husband Mark's recent failed LLC and the financial disclosures he was forced to submit during that bankruptcy proceeding, I have compiled a brief but thorough analysis." He tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the cover page. "Your household's financial difficulties are not, as you claimed, a result of market volatility. They are the direct result of a consistent pattern of hyper-consumption. your expenditures have exceeded your declared household income by, on average, over 300% for the last 3 fiscal years. The $250,000 investment you were seeking was not for a business venture. My analysis indicates it was earmarked to cover 6 months of arrears on your mortgage and to pay down the maxed-out balances on 7 high-interest credit cards. He paused, letting the cold, hard data fill the silence. In short, Mrs. Lambert, you are not experiencing a rough patch. You are insolvent, and you have been for a very long time. The blood drained from Caroline's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. She was stripped bare, her intricate web of lies unraveled and displayed for all to see by a stranger, in public, in front of her daughters, in a restaurant she now knew belonged to the sister she had just tried to swindle. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw no remorse. Only the pure, unadulterated hatred of the truly exposed. This was no longer a negotiation. This was a demolition. The weight of David's clinical assessment settled over the table, a shroud of irrefutable fact. Caroline was speechless, her arrogance finally, blessedly silenced. But I wasn't done. The financial lies were just one layer of the deceit. It was time to excavate down to the bedrock of their betrayal. I reached into my handbag and retrieved the red folder. I placed it on the table with a soft but definitive thud that seemed to echo in the silent room. "This," I said, tapping my finger on the crimson cover, "is for you, Caroline. A little light reading for your new, more frugal lifestyle. It's a comprehensive record of every loan, every emergency, every little shortfall I've covered for you for the past 10 years. It also includes the original, legally binding promissory note for the $100,000 you borrowed for your boutique, the one you swore to pay back. We can consider that decade-old debt officially called in, with interest." Her eyes, wide with panic, darted from the folder to my face. "But there's one more piece of history we need to discuss," I continued, my voice dropping, becoming more personal, more dangerous. "About this place, about Arya." I let my gaze sweep around the beautiful room, the product of my dreams and my sleepless nights. "Do you even know what stood on this property before, Caroline, on this very spot?" She could only shake her head, numb and uncomprehending. "It was a pile of fire-damaged rubble. And before that, it was a failed restaurant called Robert's Table. It was Dad's last big dream, the one he poured his heart and the last of his energy into before he got too sick to continue. The one your husband, Mark, managed for him and then swiftly ran into the ground with his breathtaking incompetence after Dad passed away. Does any of this sound familiar?" I saw a flicker of recognition, of guilt, in my mother's eyes. She knew exactly what I was talking about. I turned my full attention to her. "You told me the property had to be sold to pay off Dad's outstanding business debts," I said, my voice laced with the pain of a 15-year-old deception. "But that was a lie, wasn't it, Mother? Mr. Finch, our trusted family lawyer, helped you draft the paperwork to hide the truth." "The truth is, the property was seized by the bank to cover Mark's creditors, your son-in-law's gambling debts, and disastrous side deals. You and Caroline let me believe that lie for over a decade, all while you quietly and systematically drained what little was left of Dad's trust fund to support her." I leaned forward, the ice in my veins turning to fire. I discovered the truth 3 years ago when I started scouting locations in this district. I found the old, forgotten deed in the county records office. So I bought this land back from the bank. I paid off the liens. I cleared the debts. Your husband's debts, Caroline. I tore down the ruin of their failure, and I built this. I built Aria from the ashes of a dream you let burn. I named it Aria because it signifies a solo performance, a new song, my song, sung without a chorus of freeloaders. The final secret was out, laid bare on the table alongside the financial reports and the red folder. The very foundation of their moral superiority was revealed to be nothing but a sinkhole of lies and betrayal. I sat back, feeling a profound sense of release, as if a massive, invisible weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I felt free. I looked at my son. For the first time all evening, he wasn't looking down at the table. He was looking at me, and his eyes were shining with a fierce, protective pride that was more valuable than anything I owned. Finally, I turned to our nervous young server, Sarah, who had been standing a few feet away, a frozen witness to the entire family implosion. "Sarah," I said, my voice now gentle and kind, "could you please bring my son a lobster platter, the one with the extra truffle butter, and whatever else Chef Antoine thinks a young man of honor might enjoy? It is, of course, on the house." Then I looked at Leo, a real, warm smile finally reaching my eyes, and a sparkling water in our finest crystal glass. A look of pure relief washed over Sarah's face as she scurried toward the kitchen. Then my gaze returned to Caroline. "And Sarah," I called after her, "when you have a moment, please bring the full itemized bill for this table directly to my sister." Caroline's head snapped up as if she'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "This was your celebration, Caroline," I said, my voice cool and even. "Your stage. You ordered the $90 bottle of wine. You wanted to be the host, and in my world, hosts pay their own way." The bill arrived a few minutes later, presented on a small, discreet silver tray by Gerard, the maitre d' himself. He placed it directly in front of Caroline with the solemnity of an executioner. Caroline stared at it, her hands trembling so violently she could barely open the elegant leather folio. I watched as her eyes scanned the itemized list, widening in horror as they reached the final total at the bottom. For a table of 5, with premium wine, appetizers, and multiple entrees, even the ones they had barely touched, the cost was well into 4 figures. It was a sum I knew with absolute certainty she did not possess. She fumbled in her oversized designer handbag, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, a stark contrast to her earlier poise. She pulled out a platinum credit card and handed it to Gerard without making eye contact, a queen forced to deal with the peasantry. The entire dining room, which had fallen into a charged hush, seemed to be watching our little drama unfold. Gerard returned a few moments later, his face a perfect, impassive mask. "I'm very sorry, madame," he said, his voice soft but carrying in the silent room. "This card has been declined." A soft, collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. It was the final, brutal nail in the coffin of her public image. The humiliation was complete, a bright, searing spotlight illuminating the rot beneath her polished exterior. Her face, which had been deathly pale, now flushed a deep, blotchy crimson of pure, unadulterated rage. She shot me a look of such venomous hatred, I felt it like a physical force. My mother, looking utterly broken and 100 years old, quietly opened her own sensible purse and took out her wallet. She handed Gerard a simple debit card from a local credit union, the card she used for groceries. The transaction went through with a quiet, efficient whir from the handheld machine. Without another word, Caroline shoved her chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. She grabbed her purse, her movements stiff with fury and shame. "Olivia, Sophia, we are leaving, now." The girls, silent witnesses to their mother's complete and utter downfall, scrambled to their feet. They refused to look at me. They refused to look at Leo. They just stared at the floor, their faces burning with a shame that was not their own as they hurried after their mother. My mother was the last to stand. She paused by my chair, her face a complex tapestry of anger, betrayal, and for the very first time in my life, a flicker of fear. "You have destroyed this family, Bianca," she whispered, her voice trembling with a potent mix of sorrow and rage. "No, Mother," I replied, my own voice steady and clear, cleansed by the fire of truth. "I have just stopped paying for the illusion of one." She had no answer for that. She turned, her shoulders slumped in defeat, and followed her favored daughter out of the restaurant. I watched them go, a sad, diminished procession of deposed royalty. As they passed a table near the entrance, I saw an older gentleman, a regular I knew to be a respected physician named Dr. Miller, catch my eye from across the room. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod of profound approval. It was a small gesture from a stranger, but it felt like a verdict from a jury of my peers. It felt like vindication. The heavy oak door of Aria closed behind them, and the sound was a definitive, resounding clang, sealing off a lifetime of pain. The tension in the room broke. The murmur of conversation slowly, cautiously returned. And beside me, my son, Leo, took his first glorious bite of the magnificent truffle butter lobster that Chef Antoine himself had just placed before him. Long after the last diners had departed, when the staff was moving through the dining room with the quiet, efficient rhythm of closing time, Chef Antoine led Leo and me to a small private dining room at the back. It was my favorite space in the entire building, a hidden sanctuary with a single, massive plate glass window that offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the glittering city skyline. A silver tray with a steaming pot of chamomile tea, 2 delicate porcelain cups, and a plate of miniature pastries was already waiting for us. For a long time, we just sat in a comfortable, healing silence, sipping our tea. The frantic, high-strung energy of the evening slowly drained away, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Leo had devoured every last morsel of his lobster, eating with a slow, deliberate enjoyment that felt like a victory in itself. The haunted, nervous look was finally gone from his face, replaced by a thoughtful, contemplative calm. "Mom," he said at last, his gaze fixed on the river of headlights flowing through the city below. "Yes, honey? Why did you never tell me?" he asked, his voice soft. "About owning this place, about all of it." I took a moment, gathering my thoughts, wanting to give him an answer that was as honest and true as he was. Because I never wanted you to believe that our value, our worth as people, comes from things like this, I said, making a small gesture that encompassed the elegant room, the magnificent view, the entire successful enterprise. Our worth isn't in what we own, Leo. It's in who we are. I tried to keep my business separate from our life because I didn't want it to define our family. Tonight I realized I had to use the one thing to protect the other. He nodded slowly, his young mind processing the weight of that. Aunt Caroline, she looked so small at the end, he observed, not with triumph, but with a kind of sad wonder. That's because her power wasn't real, I explained gently. It was built on lies and intimidation and other people's money. And things built on a weak foundation can't stand when the ground starts to shake. Real strength, Leo, isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's not about making other people feel small so that you can feel big. He looked at me then, his dark eyes serious and searching. But you didn't even yell. You weren't even screaming. I kept waiting for you to. I reached across the table and took his hand, marveling at how it was nearly as large as my own. Oh, believe me, I was screaming on the inside, I admitted with a small, weary smile. I was furious. But people like your aunt and your grandmother, they expect you to lose control. They thrive on chaos. Yelling is their language. The best way to win isn't to play their game better. It's to force them to play yours. And my game is about calm, strategy, and cold, hard facts. Strategic silence, honey, is often much, much louder than an angry shout. I squeezed his hand, pouring all my love and pride into the simple gesture. I am so incredibly proud of you tonight, Leo. You were treated with such cruelty, but you never lost your kindness. You kept your dignity. You held on to the good, gentle heart that you have. That is what makes you the main character in your own story, not an extra. Don't you ever let anyone, including me, make you feel otherwise. A real, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made them shine. I'm proud of you too, Mom, he said. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of my sleeping restaurant, none of the evening's ugliness mattered anymore. The decades of pain, the bitter betrayals, the financial disputes, it all just faded into the background noise. All that was left was the pure, unbreakable bond between a mother and her son, sitting together high above the city, finally, blessedly, at peace. The weeks that followed were defined by a profound and unfamiliar silence. There were no frantic phone calls demanding money, no manipulative texts designed to guilt me, no passive-aggressive emails from my mother. The quiet was unnerving at first. I kept bracing for the next assault, the next manufactured crisis, but it never came. And slowly, the unnerving silence blossomed into a deep, soul-soothing peace. The absence of their constant draining drama was like recovering from a chronic illness I hadn't even realized I had. I heard updates through the reluctant family grapevine. Aunt Carol called once, her voice hesitant, to say that Caroline and Mark had been forced to sell their sprawling house in a short sale. They had moved into a small, cramped condominium across town. Caroline, for the first time in her adult life, had been forced to get a real job, a receptionist position at a dental office. Hearing this news, I felt no surge of triumph, no satisfying kick of schadenfreude. I just felt a quiet, detached pity. Her story was no longer my story. The narrative threads had been definitively, permanently cut. One rainy Saturday morning, months after that fateful dinner, I was clearing out old boxes in the attic, a task I'd been putting off for years. In a dusty, forgotten cedar chest filled with my father's belongings, I found a small, locked wooden box. The key, tarnished with age, was still on his old keychain, which I had kept in my jewelry box. Inside, beneath his folded military service flag and an old stopped wristwatch, was a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. They were letters he had written to me over the years, but for whatever reason had never sent. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon. I carefully opened the last one, the paper brittle with age. It was dated just a few months before his death. His familiar, strong handwriting was shakier, the effort clear in every loop and line. He wrote about his pride in my recent graduation from architecture school, his worries about the family's future, and his unwavering faith in my resilience. The final paragraph, however, felt like a message sent across time, directly to the woman I was today. "My dearest Bianca," he wrote, "I leave this world with one great fear, that I have placed too heavy a burden upon your strong shoulders. My only hope is that you will learn, sooner than I did, the crucial difference between lifting someone up and allowing them to drag you down. Your value is not, and never will be, determined by how much of yourself you can give away to others. It is determined by the boundaries you bravely set to protect your own soul. Remember this always, my child. No is a complete sentence. Your life is your masterpiece. Do not let anyone else hold the paintbrush. Tears streamed down my face, not of sadness, but of gratitude. It was his final gift to me. It was permission. It was his blessing to embrace the life I was building on my own terms. That evening, Leo and I had dinner. Not at the grand, bustling Aria, but at our own small kitchen table with cheap takeout pizza and cold sodas. We laughed about a silly movie we'd watched, talked about his grades, about a girl he liked in his science class. It was simple. It was normal. It was perfect. Looking at my son, his face relaxed and happy in the warm kitchen light, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had finally honored both parts of my promise to my father. I had looked after my family by finally, bravely letting them go. And in doing so, I had not only saved my own light, but I had made sure my son's would have all the room it needed to shine. Thank you for listening to my entire story. I am truly grateful. Comment the letter A to let me know you're different from the rest and have watched this whole video. If you have any feelings to share about the video, please write them down. Continue to click on other videos on the channel to enjoy more of our stories.